Just hours from now, the casket of former President George H.W. Bush will arrive in Washington, D.C., his service dog, Sully, refusing to leave his side.
Let's look at that. The final farewell wishes to the 41st president set for today. And meeting with Mexico, can the U.S. hammer out a deal to stop the growing caravan crisis?
Yeah, the sit-down that's set for today is a big one as conditions worsen right there at the border.
Can we turn our beds into bunk beds?
Yes, Glee. And here's the thing, it'll give us so much extra space in our room to do activities.
Please say yes.
You don't need permission from us to build bunk beds. You're adults. You can do what you want.
You haven't seen that movie. That's a great movie. And the shocking number of millennials who still live with mom and dad.
But those two not millennials.
No,
let's be
they're
clear.
A little too old for that.
Fox and Friends First continues right now. And good morning. You are watching Fox and Friends First on this Monday morning. I'm Carly Shimkus for Jillian Neely.
And I'm Rob Schmidt. Thanks for getting up early with us today. And a live look now at Capitol Hill this morning, where the country begins to say its final goodbyes to our 41st president. The casket of George H.W. Bush will make its way on Air Force One to Washington, D.C. to lie in the state rotunda.
And his beloved service dog, Sully, accompanying Bush 41 for the last time. Casey Stiegel is live in Houston with how the late president will be honored this week. Good morning, Casey.
Carly, Rob, good morning to you. Yeah, you know, this plan really has been in the works for years, and now it is just being executed, and it really is a well-oiled machine. Later this morning, the family will be gathering at the funeral home here in Houston behind me, where they will then motorcade to nearby Ellington Field, and that is where Air Force One is waiting. We want to show you a picture of that now. Typically, it's called Air Force One when the president is on board. Today, it'll technically be called Special Air Mission 41. Once arriving at Joint Base Andrews around 3:30 Eastern Time, the former president will be taken to the U.S. Capitol building, where he will lie in state ahead of Wednesday's big state funeral at National Cathedral.
I feel really good about people if they analyze not only his accomplishments, but his character. They'll say, job well done, George H.W. Bush.
And of course, everyone just cannot stop talking about this picture. Get your tissue. Sully, the president's service dog, a little bit about him. He's a yellow lab seen here at the funeral home, keeping watch over the casket. We've learned that Sully H.W. Bush, his full name, by the way, will also be traveling with the family. He's family, of course, to D.C. The president wanted him to go back into service to help another military family, and we understand that is going to happen and that he could potentially be put to work at Walter Reed Medical Center. So Sully will continue to help others as he has President Bush here in his final moments. So that is the latest here from Houston. A very big day, lots of stuff scheduled. We're going to stay on top of it and have all of it for you here on Fox News, guys.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful picture. All right, Casey, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
That is.
President Trump is considering pushing back the looming government shutdown in the wake of President George H.W. Bush's death. He is willing to sign a 2-week federal budget extension to give Congress more time to hammer out a spending bill. Republicans are fighting for $5 billion to fund the southern border wall.
And speaking of that, meanwhile, Mexican officials are in Washington this morning to work out a solution to the migrant crisis at the border.
Yeah, this as Mexican authorities are opening a new shelter in Tijuana with thousands of people living in very unsanitary conditions. And that's where we find Griff Jenkins, who continues our coverage there from the border with the very latest this morning. Hey, Griff.
Rob and Carly, good morning. Yeah, we're about 10 miles south of the border, and we are in the new shelter. Take a look at this video we shot yesterday. You'll see that there's more space there. It's a better conditions. They've got a concrete floor, and they're getting fed there. But here's the thing. Only about 3,000 of the total 6,000 are in here, meaning 3,000 may be unaccounted for. They had to leave, of course, the old shelter because of the unsanitary conditions, because of the mud. And this, of course, does not alleviate the fact that they had widespread widespread respiratory infections and lice infestations amongst its populations. Meanwhile, Mexico did inaugurate a new president, AMLO as he's known, and he sent his foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, to meet with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to, quote, discuss shared commitment to address our common challenges and opportunities, according to State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert. Congressman Bob Goodlatte taken to the airways yesterday on Fox, saying it's time for a deal. Listen.
We need an agreement with Mexico, and we need our laws changed. This is not a situation that's any better for Mexico than it is for the United States. So they ought to work together to work it out.
One big concern is that whether or not this migrant group will try and rush that border again like we saw a week ago Sunday. But the organizer with Pueblos Sin Fronteras that's behind me in this shelter said he's not worried about that right now. They learned a lesson. Take a listen.
These people already learned. They already learned their lesson. See, they know that they can't just get into the United States forcing the gates open, because it's not gonna happen. They got to do it legally.
Now we wait to find out whether or not there will be anything that comes of the meetings between the new Mexican administration and the Trump administration. The agreement that we hope to get, that the administration wants to get, is that these migrants will continue to stay here in Mexico while they play out their asylum. Guys.
Yeah. That's right. We'll be talking a little bit about that deal later on, analyzing what the implications there are and if it could happen and all that. Thank you so much, Griff. We appreciate it. All right. Meanwhile, President Trump isn't backing down on his border wall despite continued pushback from the left.
According to Fox News contributor Tammy Bruce, Congress was able to scrape together $150 billion to seal the Iran deal. So why can't they find a fraction of that for border security?
And what you also wouldn't have is the chaos that keeps everyone distracted and is not looking at maybe other specific things that Congress is doing, allows for partisan arguments on both sides to keep people divided. It almost serves as the perfect distraction to keep Americans from noticing the nature of the condition of Congress. Here's one thing I know. Somehow, Barack Obama found $150 billion to give to Iran. Right. We don't know if there was a printer or if it came from, some hologram machine. They sent they found $150 billion to give to a terrorist sponsoring nation, as our State Department recognizes it. But they can't quite find $5 billion for the wall.
Well, the border wall is also causing a rift among Democrats, with some in the House accusing Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of softening to the president's calls for funding.
Surprising thing there. All right, overnight, President Trump signaling progress with China following the G20 summit. The president tweeting, quote, China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. Now, over the weekend, the U.S. and China agreed to a truce in their tit-for-tat trade war. President Trump said he would not impose new tariffs or raise current ones on January 1st, as he previously suggested. The news is expected to boost stocks today. Dow futures already surging well over 450 points overnight.
Well, a very special start to Hanukkah this year at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Hundreds gathered for a special menorah lighting last night to mark the holiday and also to honor the 11 victims killed in that deadly October attack. President Trump again condemning anti-Semitism, writing in part, quote, Jews today continue to face many different forms of violence, hatred, and bigotry around the globe. As one nation, we pledge our continued love and support for the victims, their families, and the community, and we pray that the victims' families find some measure of peace and comfort during the holiday season.
And December tornadoes tearing through a naval submarine base in Georgia, despite the path of destruction at the Kings Bay base. Luckily, no serious injuries have been reported.
Yeah, some wild weather going on. The Midwest cleaning up after more than a dozen very late season twisters touched down in several states over the weekend. One person was killed in Missouri. Senior meteorologist Janice Dean is tracking the latest. It's weird to talk about this during Christmas time.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen. We can have tornadoes any month of the year, but we certainly had an outbreak because we had this powerful cold front sweeping across the eastern half of the country. And you can see the current temperatures, and it's 54 here in New York, ahead of that front, it's warm. I mean, relatively speaking, across the East Coast. We're almost done with this storm system. But yes, we saw dozens of reports of tornadoes as well as strong winds. We saw reports of hail and a lot of snow, almost a blizzard across portions of the Midwest and the northern plains and the Great Lakes. So right now, we're almost done with this system. We're going to see some nuisance snow, some nuisance rain with this, and then that cold front sweeps through the East Coast, and we will start to see those temperatures drop. But ahead of it, I mean, we're going to be in the 50s and 60s along the coast. There's your future radar. So we will see some lake effect snow out of this system. And then our next big on the move storm will originate from the west over the next couple of days, bringing more heavy rain and more heavy snow for the California area. Here are your highs today. We're going to start to moderate those temperatures, especially across the northern plains. Still quite warm across the south, relatively speaking, but it'll be a much quieter day after a very busy weekend of severe weather.
I'll take 54.
Yeah, it'll just
high.
for a day or two.
Yeah.
And then we're back to,
and a
30s.
lot of moisture out west, the mountains.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
And California getting dumped on. Yeah.
They need the rain, obviously, but too much of it can lead to flooding, flash flooding.
Janice, thank you so much.
Janice. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. All right, let's talk about Mars. Shortly after landing safely on Mars, NASA's InSight rover is already setting records. The space agency says the rover has generated more power during its first full day on the red planet than anything else before.
Wow. InSight is photographing Mars. Will eventually dig into the planet's core to study the interior of the planet. The mission is expected to last nearly 2 years.
Look at that. Would you go to Mars?
Depends how fast they can get me there. I think it takes about 8 months right now.
Depends on what ladies are knocking on your door, right?
It's a long road trip, yeah.
All right, the time now is 11 minutes after the hour. In the hot seat, ousted FBI Director James Comey agreeing to testify privately on Capitol Hill this week. But there's a catch. The deal he just reached with House Republicans.
And meeting with Mexico, the country's new government set to sit down with U.S. officials today. So can the two sides reach an agreement on the border with what's happening in Tijuana? Our next guest says it's a good sign that they are willing to take action. We'll see. James Comey agreed to testify behind closed doors about his involvement in the probe.
Rich Edson joins us live from Washington, D.C. with more as top Democrats cry obstruction of justice. Good morning, Rich.
Now, good morning, Carly and Rob. Former FBI Director James Comey is returning to Capitol Hill this week. He says he's agreed to testify before the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees about his handling of the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's email server.
If I were a Democrat, I'd be concerned about some of the actions taken by Mr. Comey and others in the FBI leading right up to the election, announcing a reopening of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email, and then announcing again immediately after that it was being shut down. I mean,
Republicans subpoenaed Comey to testify in a closed session. Comey had asked a judge to allow him to testify in public. Now he's tweeted, quote, "Grateful for a fair hearing from judge. Hard to protect my rights without being in contempt, which I don't believe in. So we'll sit in the dark. But Republicans agree I'm free to talk when done and transcript released in 24 hours. This is the closest I can get to public testimony." Also on Capitol Hill, the incoming chairman of the House Intelligence Committee is responding to President Trump's comments to the New York Post that he would not take a pardon off the table for his former campaign chairman.
The president continues to dangle a pardon for Paul Manafort, which only adds to the growing body of evidence that the president is engaged in obstructing justice. That, I think, is the ultimate significance here.
Last week, the special counsel's office claimed Manafort violated their plea agreement, repeatedly lying to investigators. Also today, Jerome Corsi, an associate of Trump campaign advisor Roger Stone, now says his attorneys will file a complaint against special counsel Robert Mueller alleging criminal conduct. Last week, he claimed he rejected a plea deal from the special counsel's office. Back to you.
Thanks for getting up early, Rich.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate it.
All right, the time now is 17 minutes after the hour. The gridlock in Washington could put defense spending on the chopping block, but Defense Secretary James Mattis has this message.
When we measure defense spending, we must realize it's near historic lows. We all know here today that America can afford survival.
Don Bramer is an Iraq veteran who says cutting defense would be a disservice to the troops and the Americans they serve. He's going to talk about that.
A Fox Business alert here. The CEO of General Motors meeting with lawmakers this week after the company announced plans to cut 15,000 jobs and close 5 North American plants.
A lot of people not happy with GM. Tracy Carrasco from our sister network Fox Business has more on this big upcoming meeting. Hey, Tracy.
Good morning. Yes, GM CEO Mary Barra going to have to answer to lawmakers on both sides of the aisle who both parties have not been happy about this. President Trump especially not happy. He has expressed his disappointment. He's even threatened to cut some of those government subsidies. But she is going to have to answer some tough questions about why GM has decided to cut some 15,000 jobs. That's about 15% of its workforce. Also closing down those plants in Ohio, Michigan, Maryland, also shutting down the production of several vehicles. So we are unsure exactly when that meeting is set to take place, just sometime this week.
All right, well, speaking about losing jobs, we always talk about the robot takeover, and Amazon is now testing cashierless technology at some of their larger stores?
Yes. So Amazon, they rolled out these Amazon Go stores earlier this year. You can basically go in. You don't have to, you just scan what you want with an app, and then you kind of pick everything. You walk out of the store. There's no cashier. Well, they are trying this out in bigger grocery stores. Of course, there are some problems implementing this type of technology in bigger spaces with more products, but this could be an even bigger disruption to some of those other traditional grocery stores, other retailers. Once again, Amazon coming in and making changes how we shop. So they previously said they weren't going to use this with their Whole Foods stores, but we'll have to see if they change their mind.
All right.
In the future, nobody has a job. It's just Jeff Bezos and a billion robots running the world.
Yeah.
That's it. Tracy, thanks.
Sounds terrifying.
It's coming. Gridlock in Washington may put defense spending on the chopping block. Defense Secretary James Mattis is now warning that it would also put America at risk.
When we measure defense spending, we must realize it's near historic lows. We all know here today that America can afford survival.
All right, here now to break down what happens when the military's resources are cut is Iraq War veteran and former Intel officer Don Bramer. Don, thank you so much for being with us this morning. So the military defense spending budget was supposed to be at around $733 billion by 2020. It could now go down to $700 billion. So when people are writing the budget, what's the first thing that gets cut, and how could this negatively impact the military?
Well, good morning. And one of the things that we saw, just 2 years ago, we were at a 1940 level military. And you had a case there where planes were dropping out of the sky. Our troops were underpaid and undersupplied, and even more so, our ships couldn't even sail. Now, finally, we're back to a force that is showing the world that the U.S. is a force to be reckoned with. I think cutting these resources that are so valuably needed would show the world a bad message. And in the global market that we have today, with everything going on, it sends a bad message.
Yeah, especially right now when everything's so volatile. We have a lot of, we got our fingers in a lot of pies right now, and a lot of them are very dangerous. To be cutting back is not a good time, right?
Well, no, it's not. And if you look, for the first time, we were able to have a budget that was approved and appropriated in 10 years. Now, that's with the Congress that worked together on one issue that they agreed on, that America should be strong. Now, moving forward, if we start looking at those cuts, we're going to find ourselves back in the same place they were, where we had this atrophy that made us not to be a force to be reckoned with. At the same time, when you've got China and other forces around the world trying to build their military.
Now, Defense Secretary Mattis says he's worried about China and Russia. And the National Defense Strategy Commission, which is a bipartisan group, said America might struggle to win or perhaps lose a war against China and Russia. Do you agree with that? Could that possibly happen?
Well, absolutely. And if this would have been the same United States defense that we saw 2 years ago, that would have 100% been the course. But for the first time in 17 years, the UN believes that we have peace with the Taliban. We're back on a rise, but when the rest of the world saw our military declining up to 2 years ago, they saw that as a time to take a lead or an advantage. So we're back on the rise, and I think cutting our military at this crucial point sends a bad message to the world when we're telling the United Nations and the UN that they need to increase their spending. We have to do the exact same.
Yeah. Well, Iran continues to be a pain for the United States, and they've just tested another missile, got caught doing it. They say they didn't do anything wrong. It seems clear if you read the UN agreement that they have. What do you think the response should be?
Well, the agreement 2231 clearly states that they are not supposed to be doing this type of testing and going forward with their program. You know, it is a clear example right there when you bring it up of why we cannot cut our defense spending. You know, and the deal we had in 2015 was a horrible deal for America. $1.7 billion went back to the Iranian government. They didn't use that for their people. What they used that for was to proliferate weapons across the globe into Yemen, Afghanistan, and Syria, but also to increase their nuclear program. And, you know, just a few months ago when the EU was saying, you know, the U.S. was taking the wrong steps, this shows that we are taking the right steps, and sanctions and more are needed with Iran.
Yeah. Interesting. And, you know, Mattis was quoted as saying, we all know that America can afford survival, which I'm sure resonates with a lot of folks out there this morning.
Sir, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
27 minutes after the hour, chaos erupting in Paris. Have you seen some of this? Hundreds of protesters burning cars, attacking police. What a mess. And they're vowing to continue the rioting. How the French president is responding this morning.
Wow. And trying to catch Bill and Hillary's latest speaking tour, why it could now cost less than your next lunch.
Welcome back. Rudy Giuliani slamming special counsel Bob Mueller for what he calls unethical tactics in the Russia probe. In a radio interview, the president's attorney accuses Mueller's team of intimidating witnesses.
This isn't a search for the truth. It's a witch hunt. This is what's wrong with these special prosecutors and independent counsels. They think they're God.
Well, the interview comes days after President Trump's former attorney Michael Cohen pleaded guilty to lying about a potential Trump real estate project in Russia and how long that plan went on for. France considering all options as they assess the damage from Paris's worst riots in a decade. French President Macron is considering a state of emergency and beefing up protest security. Macron is asking the prime minister for a meeting with political party leaders and the so-called yellow vest protesters to stop the violence over high taxes and a fuel tax there. There were more than 400 arrests and 133 injuries over the weekend as the Champs-Elysees and all that area around the Arc de Triomphe has been just ripped apart in these protests. Also, a special tribute from the Houston Texans honoring President George H.W. Bush.
Please stand and join in a moment of silent reflection in memory of President Bush.
Now the Texans holding a moment of silence for their hometown fan. Houston playing with heavy hearts, but they did come out and beat the Browns 29-13. So that's good news. Yeah. Carly, over to you.
All right, and in just hours from now, the nation will begin their final farewells to the former president. Tributes pouring in across the country, including from one man whose job it was to protect the former vice president during a campaign event in Florida more than 30 years ago. Colonel Rob Maness, a two-time Senate candidate and founder of Opslands.com, joins us now. Colonel Maness, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I hear you have a pretty amusing story about a personal encounter you had with the former president. So can you tell us what happened?
Good morning, Carly. Well, as you said, about 30 years ago, I was on a protection detail. I was in Air Force EOD, Explosive Ordnance Disposal at the time, and we were assigned to the Secret Service on the detail to protect the vice president at an event in Florida. And I was in the lead car clearing his motorcade route on an interstate, and my job was to make sure the overpasses were clear, there weren't any abandoned vehicles that could be dangerous and those kinds of things. And we saw a large truck with the word dynamite on the side of the trailer on an overpass, so I had to get out of the police car I was riding in and make my way up there. But as I was making my way up to try to climb up the hill to the overpass, I stepped down on the grass and ended up in water over my head because in a suit and tie. So I promptly got out of the water, went up and cleared the vehicle, got back in the vehicle, and went ahead to the venue in front of the vice president's motorcade, and hopped out of the car because part of my job was to clear the venue also. And there was a man waiting for me there. His name was George W. Bush. He looked at me. He was a much younger version of himself, as I was then too. He looked at me. He kind of grinned that grin, and he said, "What happened to you?" And I told him the story. We chuckled a little bit. He patted me on the back, and I went on my way. And eventually, I did see the vice president in the venue, and he gave me a look and a grin and pointed at me, and that was it. But he was a great commander-in-chief when he did become president. I do have to say that.
Yeah, well, nothing like looking not your best when you're meeting one of the most important people in the world. So sorry about that for happening to you. Now, you say that Bush 41, the former president, is the most exceptional commander-in-chief of the military you've ever served under. Why?
That's exactly right. He's the only one that I served under that had combat experience, which I later got under his command for the first time in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And he made the decisions the right way. He told his generals what needed to be done. They came up with the plan. Then he approved the plan. They went out and executed the plan. And then he made the strategic decisions to end the conflict when it was the appropriate time. He built an extremely good coalition that was made up of all kinds of countries you wouldn't even think of today that fought that war in the first Gulf War. And then he made the right decisions after the war. And the man, when the wall came down and the Soviet Union fell and the Cold War ended, Commander-in-Chief Bush could have made hundreds of mistakes with the movements of forces and U.S. forces in Europe and those kinds of things, but they were all done almost in a flawless manner. You know, when I was later a commander under the commander-in-chief that was Bush 43, I had already knew that he would be a good commander-in-chief, but he just didn't have the combat experience. So you could tell that was there, but Bush 41 really just did it right.
And, you know, with that in mind, do you think that he's been given enough credit for all that he accomplished during his 4 years in office?
Oh, absolutely not. But you know what? Knowing him the way that we know him today, I think he just looked at that and said, well, you know, it is what it is. My job was to serve, and he humbly moved on, and he continued to serve his entire life, really, and is serving us today.
And what a humble man. And you see the two former Bush presidents on the screen. One of his final conversations was with his son. They shared an I love you message. Family was always so important to him, and now he's in a better place with his wife and daughter. Thank you so much, Colonel Maness. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Carly.
Thanks.
Good stuff. All right, 36 minutes after the hour, President Trump threatening a government shutdown if his border wall isn't in the budget.
A possible shutdown if we don't get the wall money. A very possible. We're in negotiation. If we don't get border security, possible shutdown.
Can either party break the stalemate? Can they work together to get a deal? We're going to debate that coming up.
George H.W. Bush. The mission was, how do we serve the United States?
The first farewells for George H.W. Bush happening today as his casket will lie in the state rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. We are live in Houston with the tributes pouring in. And meeting with Mexico, can the U.S. hammer out a deal to stop the growing caravan crisis? The sit-down set for today as conditions worsen at the border. And case closed on this Engagement Day disaster. How a ring dropped through a Times Square sewer grate finally found its way home. Fox and Friends First starts right now. And good morning to you. You are watching Fox and Friends First on this Monday morning. I'm Heather Childers. Thank you so much for starting your day and your week with us. We begin with a live look at Capitol Hill this morning. That is where America will begin to say their final goodbyes to our 41st president today. The casket of George H.W. Bush will make its way on Air Force One to Washington, D.C. to lie in the state rotunda. His beloved service dog, Sully, did you see this picture? Accompanying Bush 41 for the last time. Look at that. Well, Casey Stegall is live for us in Houston with how the late president will be honored this week. Hi, Casey. Boy, that picture this weekend, it was something else.
Heather, there have been so many moving and powerful images that have come out in the last several days, remembering a man who is known for loving his family and a deep love for his country. And everything starts right here today at the Lewis and Son Funeral Home in Houston. This is where the family will be gathering a little bit later this morning, and they will escort the flag-draped casket carrying the former president over to Ellington Field, as you said, where it will be boarded on a plane formerly known as Air Force One when the president is on board, and they will all fly to Washington, D.C. And Heather, you talk about that picture. We got to show it again. So moving. This is Sully, the president's service dog. He got this dog after former First Lady Barbara Bush passed away earlier this year to help him. And it shows that dog keeping watch over his master one final time. The caption reading, "Mission complete."
The office is more important than man. It's really one of the most important things for Americans to understand. Dad taught me this, and therefore one of the jobs is to strengthen the institution of the presidency, bring honor to the office, and that clearly George H.W. Bush did.
Later today, the former president will lie in state at the U.S. Capitol, as you mentioned, and all day tomorrow through Wednesday morning. Wednesday, that national day of mourning, and the state funeral will be held at 11 Eastern at the Washington National Cathedral. From there, it is back to Texas, where Mr. Bush will lie in repose at St. Martin's Episcopal Church around the corner from us here in Houston. And Thursday morning, a second funeral service held there before finally taking one last ride in Texas. A train will carry the former president from Houston to College Station, where he will be laid to rest at his presidential library and museum. Heather?
Yeah, and of course, we will have continuing coverage throughout the day right here on the Fox News channel with a lot of personal stories being shared. Thank you very much, Casey. Great to see you. Well, to a Fox News alert for you, a senior leader of ISIS involved in murdering a former U.S. Army Ranger is now dead. U.S. officials say that Abu al-Umaran was killed in a drone strike in Syria over the weekend, along with several other jihadists. Now, the terror leader was linked to the beheading of Peter Kossig in 2014. Now, Kossig was captured while working as an aid worker in Syria. A new satellite images reveal a new Russian anti-aircraft missile system at an airbase in Crimea. Now, the report, exclusively obtained by Fox News, shows 8 launchers on the S-400 surface-to-air system, and the missiles can travel up to 250 miles. Intelligence reports say the system was established 2 weeks before recent tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Russia seized 3 Ukrainian ships, claiming they crossed into their waters illegally. And Iran not backing down after being accused of test firing a medium-range ballistic missile over the weekend, capable of hitting all of the Middle East and parts of Europe. This is according to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He says the missile can carry multiple warheads, which is a violation of the UN Security Council resolution. A spokesperson for the terror regime says the test did not violate any UN resolutions and that it was defensive in nature. The new actions by Iran come after the Trump administration reimposed sanctions on the country just last month and pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal earlier this year. Well, overnight, President Trump now signaling progress with China coming out of the G20 summit. The president tweeting, quote, China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on cars coming into China from the U.S. Currently, the tariff is 40%. Well, over the weekend, the U.S. and China agreed to a truce in their tit-for-tat trade war, and President Trump said that he would not impose new tariffs or raise current ones on January 1st, as he had threatened to do so. The news expected to boost the stock market today. Dow futures already surging well over 450 points overnight, and we'll have much more on all of this coming up. Well, Mexican officials are in Washington this morning to work out a solution to the migrant crisis at the border. But authorities are already opening a new shelter in Tijuana with thousands facing unsanitary conditions. And that is where we find Griff Jenkins, who has the very latest for us. Good morning, Griff. How you doing?
Hey, good morning, Heather. I'm outside of the new shelter. We're about 10 miles south of the border. Remember, the other shelter was right on the border. This one's about 10 miles south. Let me show you inside here with this video. It's a much better arrangement for these migrants. They have a hard concrete floor as opposed to the mud. They have a little bit of shelter. But here's the thing. There's only about 3,000. Only about half of them appear to be in here. Now, they were pulled out of the old one. Remember the old one? The conditions were so unbelievably difficult and unsanitary. After the rains, it had flooded. It had become really one of the worst situations I've seen, covering a lot of different areas. But after that one closed, many people, I guess, took to the streets or tried to camp out in Tijuana's local areas. And so that's going to account for where some of those others went. But meanwhile, the big news, of course, was Mexico got a new president, AMLO as he's known, and the foreign minister, Marcelo Ebrard, traveling to Washington to meet with Secretary of State Pompeo, to, quote, talk about their shared commitment to address their common challenges. Ultimately, they're working on a deal that would keep these migrants here in Mexico. And yesterday, Congressman Bob Goodlatte taken to the airways with Maria Bartiromo saying they got to get a deal. Listen.
We need an agreement with Mexico, and we need our laws changed. This is not a situation that's any better for Mexico than it is for the United States. So they ought to work together to work it out.
Now, the big concern, of course, with officials here is that there might be an attempt to rush that border again. We asked one of the organizers with Pueblos Sin Fronteras, Luis Cruz. Here's what he said.
These people already learned. They already learned their lesson. See, they know. Now they know that they can't just get into the United States forcing the gate open, because it's not going to happen. They got to do it legally.
We'll find out what comes of the meetings in Washington. The foreign minister saying he'd like to see a sort of a Marshall Plan for Central America. Guys?
Yeah, we will see what happens in this developing story. Thank you so much, Griff. You've been doing a great job with this. Thank you. Well, the president has been promising to secure the border, of course, since day one. And Matt Schlapp, chairman of the American Conservative Union, says that if Republicans are going to deliver, they need to get busy.
There's no question that a wall would help things. Number one, it sends the message loud and clear about how serious we are. Yeah. That if you want to apply to be a refugee or an asylee, you have to go to an embassy, you have to go to a port of entry. There's a way to do this. But I think for Republicans, it's one of the reasons why they don't have a majority in the House anymore. Right. Because they don't take these parts of the agenda seriously. But there's another piece to this, which is I actually think it's helping the Republicans. When they see this caravan, which I believe can't possibly just be a coincidence, everybody got on some corner in Guatemala and all came up 5,000 strong together. I think it's really shining a light on the fact that Donald Trump was right with much of what he talked about our illegal immigration crisis, and we better solve it.
Well, Democrats have voiced support for securing the border, but refuse any money to build the proposed border wall. Well, a special start to Hanukkah this year at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Hundreds gathered for a special menorah lighting to mark the holiday and honor 11 victims killed in that deadly October attack. President Trump once again condemning anti-Semitism, writing in part, quote, Jews today continue to face many different forms of violence, hatred, and bigotry around the globe. As one nation, we pledge our continued love and support for the victims, their families, and the community. And we pray that the victims' families find some measure of peace and comfort during this holiday season. And a special tribute from the Houston Texans honoring President George H.W. Bush. Bush 41's hometown team remembering him before their game against the Browns. Watch.
Please stand and join in a moment of silent reflection in memory of President Bush.
He loved his sports. After the moment of silence, the Texans win their 9th straight game, 29-13. That was fitting. Well, let's talk about the Green Bay, though. The Green Bay Packers fire head coach Mike McCarthy after 13 seasons. This comes after a stunning 20-17 loss to the Cardinals. Much more on that later today. And then the LA Chargers shocked the Steelers, rallying from 16 points behind to win 33-30 on a last-second field goal. And the Bucs intercept Cam Newton 4 times, upsetting the Panthers 24-17. I got nothing to say about that. Well, the time now is about 11 minutes after the top of the hour. And in the hot seat, ousted FBI Director James Comey agreeing to testify privately on Capitol Hill this week. But there's a catch, the deal he just reached with House Republicans.
Can you reach it? Please hold on.
Whatever he had to do, he was going to save old Clark Griswold.
And Christmas vacation chaos. The decoration right out of the movie that sparked real life panic. Well, President Trump is considering pushing back the looming government shutdown in the wake of President George H.W. Bush's death. The president could sign a 2-week federal budget extension to give Congress more time to hammer out a spending bill. Republicans are fighting for $5 billion to fund the southern border wall. And the Texas Attorney General is suing San Antonio over the state's anti-sanctuary city law. Ken Paxton is asking for more than $11 million in fines. And Paxton is accusing San Antonio of violating state law that requires local agencies to hand over illegal immigrants to federal officials. The city claims that it is following the law. And this morning, the Attorney General will weigh in on all of this, the new lawsuit, at 7:30 on Fox and Friends. Well, President Trump making a major announcement overnight after the U.S. and China call a ceasefire in the escalating trade war. The president tweeting that China has agreed to reduce and remove tariffs on American-made cars, which is a major win for the White House. So what does this mean for American businesses? Here now to weigh in is